Hello everyone. Today is Friday, the 28th of March. I'm going to talk about the demoralization of the West. Demoralization of people in their own soil and its difficulties in confronting fundamentalism. And I don't mean just fundamentalism in the one way that we always use it. Fundamentalism, for want of a better word, is not something that just can be just attributable to Islamist terrorists. I'm going to talk about another kind of fundamentalism, that which involve those who do not or will not change their minds. To me, they are also fundamentalists of a different sort. I'm not talking here about not those who will not, do not change their principles, the moral rules upon which they judge everything else. Their life, the politics of their country, those are not to be, they are not willing to barter. Those are principles relating to your strongly held beliefs. But I don't want to talk about the soul here. I want to talk about the mind. Those principles concerned with the mind can be changed according to different evidence presented to you. You know, what you believe in politics, your stand in politics, that can be changed according to new evidence, or you start looking at it from a different point of view, or you are not aware of this or that. So you can change your mind on those. You might hold them because that is all you heard, or because of fashion, or because of laziness, for whatever it is. And for some reason, you hold on to them and you don't want to listen. Even though they could be changed, you don't want to, you don't want to hear anything else. Okay? You don't want to entertain any other evidence. Look, the commotion, the reaction that, for example, I'm getting to that point, just on one aside for a minute. The reaction that terror attacks by, some fundamentalist branches of Islamic groups, but not only them, other acts of violence too, violence that is going on at the moment, not only by one group. Okay, the reaction, the horror that has produced throughout the Western world goes far beyond the logical and understandable wish to want to protect ourselves. The reaction goes beyond wanting to protect ourselves. So this is what I want to talk about. I'm not going to discuss this from a religious or sociological or even a political point of view, because that requires time and requires competence, which I lack in that sphere. So no religious beliefs, but I want to discuss it more from a philosophical or perhaps even a psychological point of view, in terms of me wondering out loud, of discussing, debating with you, or put it to you for see what you think about it. First, this reaction, in a way, if you think about it, it is striking, really, that it is the citizens of precisely the more developed world, the economically more developed world, that react not only with feelings of horror and rejection, as is expected, obviously natural, but my point is that, and I think I'm right, okay, on this, although it may sound strange. But together with this feeling of horror and rejection, there is also a hidden and involuntary, an unconscious perhaps, for the most part, a strange fascination about this excess with which, let's deal with suicidal terrorists first. The excess of this decision taken by one individual or a group to actually die killing. We don't quite understand it. How can they get to that point? There is a horror and rejection, yes, but also a fascination about how that is possible. And this is a certain inner fascination with horror, which can be about other types of events, for example, indiscriminate bombing and so on. And together with this reaction, sometimes, even though we have this reaction, rejection, horror, some fascination, there is always this other reaction too of wanting to look the other way. You don't want to hear any more about it. You don't want to look at it anymore, not because they are just barbaric, the videos or the photographs, but because you don't want to get involved. You want to know. And there is which is understandable, but there is a correlation here in some distant wildlife, an instinct to behave passively sometimes, not move, before a predator's attack, as if hypnotized by him, the predator, in some way. Sometimes we fight, and sometimes we just stand still. And this is, I think, is equivalent. I don't want to know too much about it. It's making me uncomfortable. If there is something that can hardly be denied about indiscriminate killing, based on a set of beliefs or stance, political stance, for example, is the ability to inspire these people, to inspire in their followers the, shall we say, courage, the willingness, the boldness, perhaps, even to go against the whole entire world. It doesn't matter. One thing they have is this unshakable sense of victory. And we saw this not only now, we're seeing it today in some quarters, but usually we have to we all go back to the 1930s and National Socialism and so on. We might be seeing it today. Something that insists, that tirelessly demands a blind faith in its ultimate triumph. There is a seduction going on here. It can be explained perhaps in part by the the enchantment, the spell brought about by horror or the atrocious, but only in part. There is something else. Let's say it is an involuntary admiration. Involuntary. An involuntary admiration for those who are able to adhere unconditionally to their principles, however much horror and condemnation they might inspire. They will continue to adhere to it. Perhaps because many people in the West, I don't want to say we are all, So many people in the West are really spiritual orphans. People who lack similar strong beliefs that inspire, similar in the sense of believing in something, that inspire such devotion to a cause. Or perhaps there are many people who don't have any strong beliefs at all. Or perhaps they do have them, but they are incapable or not willing to make personal sacrifices for those principles. These people that I mentioned, willing to sacrifice, knowing that they will triumph, that they are sure that they will win today, tomorrow, or in 100 years' time. That is their belief. Doesn't matter how long it takes to achieve that goal, or how many of them have to die or be killed. So they are in a certain way strange to us, aren't they? For centuries now, since the Enlightenment, actually earlier, it started with the Protestant Revolution, but certainly since the Enlightenment, we have loaded ourselves with reasons and rationality and rationalism. Remember that in the 17th century we abandoned the soul, the man consisted in body and mind and soul. We abandoned the soul and the soul, and we were left with just body and mind. Everything and anything spiritual was supposed to be in the mind. Okay, so we have loaded ourselves with reasons and rationality, and with this rationalization of life, and ultimately, what we have managed to achieve is to become, having taken away the soul, we have become uncentered. We have become more and more unstructured, more and more diffused, uncentered. And that thing, having gotten rid of it, was perhaps what created that, what gave us that ideal that triggers us or that motivates us enough. Sometimes willing to give our lives for it, sometimes we don't have to go that far, but makes it possible for us to sacrifice for someone else. What am I? What am I willing to die for? Anything at all? What are you willing to die for? Anybody? But okay, so this is, I want to leave aside the question of death because I want to move on. Leaving aside questions of death and being able to die for what you believe in. More to one's willingness to sacrifice something for what you believe in. In other words, other kind of fundamentalisms, perhaps other parallels. Now, in this time of wars, the two sides that argue over what is going on in Eastern Europe or what is going on in the Middle East or whatever other wars might come next. There are some who continue to believe in their own position, the position that they have taken, however much logical, empirical evidence different from theirs you bring to the discussion. We notice this. They're unwilling to hear it. Okay, now, here we are not dealing with just fidelity of belief, blind or otherwise. Here what we have is something like your mind as a fixed gear, or the gears stuck, a stuck gear rationality, which is nevertheless going to give you, even though it is stuck and unplugged, you're not allow anyone to poke holes in it. That is going to give you all the answers that you need, and rest assured, with infallible coherence. So you think. This is what I mean. An example. The distinguished physicist Lee Smolin tells in one of his works about a scene at the airport that is so bizarre that is, well, it's just comical, really. It was during, he tells us, during a return flight from Europe to the United States, and he's there at the airport, and there is a whole bunch of young people. It's a youth movement who call themselves Young Earth. Okay, and they are talking and discussing amongst themselves about all kinds of things. One of them evolution, and the other one the extinction of the species, of some species. And Smolin notices that some actually in the conversation are denying that there is such a thing as extinct animals. It doesn't exist. There are no extinct animals at all. And the conversation goes something like this. He gets involved, and there is some, well, what about dinosaurs? Dinosaurs are not, this is how the conversation goes. Dinosaurs are not extinct. I know people say that, but they're not extinct at all. They are alive and they're walking around on Earth. That's ridiculous. What are you saying? Where are dinosaurs walking around? In Africa. In Africa? But Africa is full of people, and if there were dinosaurs there, someone would have seen one, at least one. How is it possible that no one has seen any dinosaur? Because they live in the heart of the jungle, you see, and people do not live in the heart of the jungle anymore. Yeah, but even so, someone would have seen them, some would have seen something. No, because they spend most of their time hibernating in caves. In caves? But dinosaurs are so huge that if they are in caves, those caves have to be absolutely huge and enormous, right? Because just for the dinosaurs to be able to be there, so someone would have seen one of these huge caves where dinosaurs are. And sure, someone would have said, my goodness, what a huge cave. Let me go and see who is in here. No, because you see, they are in hibernation, and when they go into hibernation in the caves, what dinosaurs do is to seal the entrances to the caves with soil and other things so that no one can enter there. And and the conversation goes on like this. And at the end, the physicist has to admit and understand that his opponents are invincible. Invincible. There is no way that you're going to win that argument at all. I know it's an extreme example, but that's it. They are invincible because they're not able to perceive or begin to perceive the implausibility of the arguments that they use. And so, yes, it is understandable that many of us would lose patience and with this close-mindedness and just, okay, I give up. However, the physicist actually points something else here, which doesn't go against them, even though it sounds, a little bit stupid, all of it. But he says, nevertheless, take into account that these are also the groups, he says. I don't know whether you agree with this or not, but these are also the groups that actually, he says, nourish the ranks of the armies that fight their country's wars. And partly thanks to them, the demographic catastrophe that looms over Europe and the Americans is not so imminent. Why? Here and in other less extreme examples, we see a kind of fundamentalist irrationality on the one hand, and on the other, we could see other examples that show us the complete opposite. The one who does not believe anything, the skeptic, the nihilist, who does not believe in anything at all except perhaps himself. And what is happening now, I contend, is that the final stage of modern rationality, the final stage of modernity, is not actually created by those who believe, but is actually moving to more to the skeptic. More of us tend to be skeptical nihilists, perhaps. I know that is an extreme, but going more to that side, with sin of being skeptics more than believers, perhaps. The skeptic who believes in nothing, the nihilist who believes in nothing, which could be just as dangerous as the other, or perhaps even more. But surely these are extremes, the one who believes so dramatically and the one who doesn't believe in anything. There has to be obviously something in between, nuances. Of course. So the question is it possible to have religious faith and rationality at the same time, to combine faith and reason? The Church always says that, of course, it is not only possible, but it's a duty. You are a rational being. You cannot forget that. But to bring the two together, and also for those who do not believe in anything, believe in nothing, or rather who believe that nothing is worth their sacrificing for, is it possible for them too not to succumb to this passivity and this indifference and this feeling of impotence? I don't believe in anything, so there's nothing I can do. Something in between. Of course there has to be. We can still see people capable of great ideals today, and willing to sacrifice sometimes life on limb. Sometimes you don't have to go that far, but many who sacrifice themselves for others, albeit in a rather more quiet way. There are many cases, of course. You may know very many. I was reading, I'll give you one example from history, the Second World War. I was just reading about it, that is why it's... the Soviet fleet, they had these atomic submarines. And these submarines were experiencing lots and lots of breakdowns all the time, with worrying frequency, really. And that meant that carrying out emergency repairs meant, and they knew it, exposing the crew to lethal radiation. They were professionals, so they knew, about the lethal radiation. And yet there was never at any point a shortage of volunteers willing to expose themselves to radiation and fix the problem. And how the story was told is not necessarily out of, your ideology or even patriotism. It was simply the simple solidarity with your fellow crew members. They needed to be repaired, lethal radiation, yes, but let's do it. It's solidarity with your fellow crew members. I read also about the Titanic, and I don't know whether this is true or not, because there are so many legends about the Titanic, especially after the film, yeah. But I read that there was one particular instance that when the ship was going down and when it is the order was given to abandon the ship, and people were rushing all together. There was this tumult of people all together at the same time, trying to get to the boats, to save their lives. And the captain, seeing these tumults of people there, the captain took a megaphone and urged them to behave, perhaps even queue up. The story says that he took up the megaphone and said, "Gentlemen, let us not forget we are British." Yeah, and you know what? And people responded to that. And they abandoned the deck stoically and went to the bar to get a glass of whiskey or something, to die stoically. Solidarity also here. So I am asking, is there something, even aesthetics, even fair play, even, manners, that inspire a supreme gesture? In other words, is there a more nuanced way, apart from religious faith or principles on the one hand, and skeptical nihilism on the other, something between these two alternatives, where we are able to sacrifice ourselves in the long run, in thinking of the future? And this, in the long run, in the future, is important and perhaps not sufficiently taken into account. Because, of course, religion and other, let's say, given ethical models, let's say, create bonds, binding commitments from people in a greater or lesser scale, and they are transferred from father to son and to future generations. So established religions, more than other ethical models, have a clear advantage here, because the most established ones certainly have survived already centuries and millennia. That a person bases his whole existence, or at least its premature end, around an ideal, or based on an ideal, does not seem unusual here. That it spreads to a whole collective, even to a different epoch, is not exceptional either. But that once the founding, the original charisma is no longer there, the fact that it is transmitted and preserved from parents to sons, from sons to grandsons, a plexus of values strong enough to create an ethno-cultural identity and keep it intact in difficult circumstances, and circumstances very different from the circumstances when it was first born, that is much less common. Christianity passed this test and became the dominant ethical authority in the European countries and later in the Americas. And this hegemonic role was questioned as a result of that break, the fragmentation caused by the Protestant revolt. But even then, at that time, it was inconceivable that people were still thinking of a social ethic outside of religion. Even in places where this division was most hurtful or painful, for example in England, another movement arose at the same time that sought a transfer. It was a transfer of leadership from one religion to another denomination, they call it. Okay. There is a codifix from Robert Boyle, the scientist. Irish. Well, actually they say Anglo-Irish. I think if I hear it now, I would think of Northern Ireland. But at that time, in the 17th century, what did it mean? It meant Irish, but under the dominion of England, I suppose. Or it could be an it could be an Irish Protestant, perhaps. I'm not sure. I think he says in codifix that he wrote, is dated July the 22nd, 1691. He allocated the sum of £50 sterling annually as a grant for a learned theologian in charge of the following tasks, and he enumerates the tasks. Preach 8 sermons a year, to teach the Christian religion, preach the Christian religion to notorious infidels like the atheists, the deists, the pagans, the Hebrews, and the Mohammedans, but not stooping to entering into controversies among Christians and fighting one another. He wanted to avoid that. There is a famous correspondence between the so-called philosopher king Frederick II of Prussia and the atheist French philosopher d'Alembert, who was the head of the philosophy party during the French Enlightenment. And there is an interesting discussion between both of them. Both of them, of course, Freemasons, so obviously heavily active during the French Revolution. There is a correspondence about the possibilities of what they refer to as natural religion or popular religion. That is a religion, a new religion, secularism, that trying to bring about, detached, of course, from Christianity and from doctrine. But they admit that a kind of a religion is needed anyway to form a solid foundation for social life. Okay, we would call it laicism, secularism. Leaving aside Christianity, this new natural religion is to take place. How are we going to do that? They ask themselves. Both men were deists, meaning believe in the existence of a supreme being. They don't mind that. A creator, perhaps, but a creator that's not intervene or interfere in the universe, is just out there and that's it. At one time they called him the architect of the universe. Okay, so obviously being Freemasons, they wanted Christianity out of the picture. Certainly Catholicism out of the picture, against which they fought and are fighting. but not only of Catholicism, but of other Protestant denominations too. They are just, as I said, they're just happy with a creator. That belief does not offend anyone, okay? An atheist Jew could just believe in this creator and that's it. It doesn't offend anybody to believe in a creator who doesn't intervene, doesn't interfere. So they agreed on that. But they differed, and this is the correspondence, on how to go about displacing the old religion and imposing the new. Okay, and they play a little game here because one pretends to be the idealist and the other one the Machiavellian. They both agree, but they're just discussing how do we bring that popular religion, that meaning popular in the sense of for the common people, that new natural religion. And the King Frederick II says, and I quote him here, I don't know who was that Englishman, I don't know his name, that having done the horoscope of the Christian religion and having calculated its duration, has fixed its end for the end of this century. That was the 18th century. It would not be disagreeable to me to see this event, but I think that things will not go so fast, and that the hierarchy, the Catholic Church, will maintain its despised absurdities for a couple more centuries, more so since, especially because they are supported by the enthusiasm of the mob. End of quote. So, contrary to this, his friend and confidant, D'Alembert, he advocated uniting truth with efficiency. Efficiency, not a new word. Okay, it is used, if you see some of my other videos, it is used now by the tech oligarch as the new right in America, but not a new word. Okay, so uniting truth with efficiency, D'Alembert, the French philosopher. And he begins to see himself as a sort of the prophet, let us say, of this new popular religion. And he writes to King Frederick II, and he says, my question, if it is possible to make it, is that for the people to dispense of religious fables, it would be worthwhile for an academy as yours, Your Majesty, as yours, to propose it. I think that the people should be told the truth, and that there never really is a real advantage when we deceive them. In this conversation, D'Alembert plays the role, as I said, of the naive idealist, and Frederick of the skeptic. Even though the Machiavellian skeptic, even though he had written a book entitled The Anti-Machiavellian. Okay, Frederick's conclusion about the new structure of society around truth could not be more pessimist. He says, quote, imperfection in both morals and physics is the character of this world we inhabit. It would be work in vain to try to illuminate the mob. In fact, doing so may prove dangerous for those who try. One must content oneself with being sensible with oneself if one is able to do so, and abandon the common masses to error, trying, however, to distinguish between that and allowing them to commit crimes which would disturb the order of society. The people are undoubtedly imbecile animals, who allow themselves to be led into darkness when nothing better is presented to them. And you say to offer them truth. Yes, if this truth is simple, especially if it goes direct to their heart, just like religion does. For they want no other and understand no other. Actually, Frederick here might have had more foresight than D'Alembert. During the French Revolution, there were very determined attempts to establish, first in this new religion, the festival of nature, the cult to reason in Notre Dame Cathedral, you remember, okay? They took reason as a lady and put it there instead of the Virgin Mary kind of thing. Okay, the festival, just to supplant all the old festivities. The festival of nature, the cult to reason. And lastly, forget about Christ on the cross. Worship a superior being. Nothing wrong with that. But nevertheless, all this did not put a stop to all the many crimes perpetrated during the terror. And above all, it actually barely stood the test of time, the old rights and the old religion being re-established soon after, a decision actually made by Napoleon himself. But this movement, however, of the cult to nature and cult to reason experienced an upswing later, around 1870, when the new secularism of the Third Republic tried to break once and for all that reviled alliance, as they saw it, between throne and altar, and used that natural religion as a useful means to also, and at the same time, erode the political and social standing of the church there. The chemist and powerful minister of education later on, Marcelin Barthelot, Freemason obviously too, openly also in debates like this, openly harassing, quite unjustly actually, the distinguished physicist and prestigious Catholic intellectual Pierre Duhem, could serve actually as an example of this battle in which there are no winners and almost everyone is a loser. Other examples of this in Germany. Bismarck ordered the construction of the central railway station right there at the foot of an imposing cathedral, beautiful cathedral, with the intention, as he said, to placing the temple of progress next to the temple of reaction. Someone said, and I don't know where I read it, that there are many who boast about being enemies of God, but really all they are is enemies of the caretaker, or the sacristan, the sexton. Of course, to be fair, it could also work the other way. There are many who think themselves friends of God, and they are really only friends of the sexton, but in any case, never mind. And most of all now we can see is uncertainty and doubt, lack of resolution. Another author says, I attended a Catholic Mass. When then after it finished, the church building was being closed after Mass and people were leaving, and as we were doing so, I thought, Goodness, I should have at least prayed. He wrote this. I should have at least prayed, better than just kneeling there, daydreaming. But pray? Really? Can't do it. Catholicism fascinates me. Its atmosphere of incense and wax and candles intoxicate me. I am sometimes moved by its prayers to the point of tears. I am sometimes squeezed to the marrow by her songs and her chants. But I am not like that. I am disgusted with my existence, sick of myself, but from there to turning around, leading a new life, changing course, and embarking on a new journey, that is a very, very long trip. Besides, he says, even though I'm disturbed while in church, the moment I step out, once again, the old ways come back and I am lazy and dry. Ultimately, deep down, he told himself as he stood up and proceeded to leave the church, he said, what I do have is a heart that has been hardened, a heart long smoked out by revelry and pleasure. I am worthless. End of quote. Imagine that. I am worthless. To come to that conclusion, how painful that is. So that is the conclusion, not logical but existential, of having witnessed, perhaps with some degree of melancholy, or having pondered with himself, whether one can or cannot go back to that world. To go back to that world. Not to the old faith, obviously, because now for him certainly it was evidently lost. However tired you get, however empty you get, however disillusioned you get, however whatever unsolvable theoretical conflicts you might have, you might come up with, you can no longer go back to, or you can no longer believe. He reached the conclusion that his heart was just hardened. So, this is what I'm trying to say with all these examples, that this modernity or post-modernity now, that started with the Enlightenment in the West, that new religion, that new popular religion has actually been, throughout these last 3 centuries, encroaching itself in society to the point that you see the hardened heart. He could not go back to believing. It has been encroaching itself in society, in people's minds and in people's hearts, as indeed it was intended that it should do. To eradicate Christianity, and in his place put new subterfuges. And so much so that it has merged or replaced Christian culture in Europe and the Americas. It has replaced it. Not with everybody, of course. I'm glad to say that not with me. No way. But this new religion is seen, as it was intended, as a mark of progress, of advancement. But its triumph, you must accept, has come at a price. Because to achieve this progress, modernity, to use the tiresome expression perhaps, had to sell its soul to achieve this. And now we see in a society where practically any and every ethical constraint is lost. So we are back to me, you, the items, back in the jungle, really. And in its place, in place of religion, we have these niceties, to be accepted, obviously, by everyone is the lowest common denominator. Democracy, freedom, human rights, I don't know what else. It's all very abstract. But this might provide, is the only glue, might provide a general consensus, this lowest common denominator. But it does not have the center, it does not have the solidity. It doesn't even have the attractiveness to withstand not only external pressures, but internal as well, inner unrest within oneself. Hence the despair, hence the emptiness. Hence that question mark with which I started, that fascination for those that we see even committing terrible acts. But the question mark, how are they willing to sacrifice themselves for what they believe, however good, bad, indifferent? That is what we cannot do anymore. To sacrifice for something bigger than ourselves, beyond ourselves. That is what is missing today. And it is missed. A center, a living center. If you were to take it to its obvious conclusion, I would say God. We miss God. We miss believing in God. Western society misses, it is my contention, on a very large scale that cannot be expressed. Western society misses not believing in God. Misses believing in God because it does not. And sometimes we wish we did. And that is the cause of so many problems. So can we go back? No, can we go back? Well, you see, it's not, I don't think it's as difficult as it sounds, as impossible as it sounds, because from my own point of view, since I do believe, what I see is that yes, we have left God, we have certainly abandoned the Christ, but the thing is that He hasn't abandoned us. He hasn't left us. How we proceed from there is up to each one of us. And I thank you for listening. Bye-bye.